Log entry, April 17, 1945, for 23 hours, Fliegerhorst Ghetto, outskirts of Berlin, Germany. In the gray pallor before dawn, when the mist crawled low across the tarmac and the last functioning hangars of the Luftwaffe stood like mausoleums to a dying air arm, a dispatch rider arrived from the Oberkommando der Luftwaffe bearing a reel of intercepted American footage, coded, Feindjäger 77, Langstreckenbomber, TYP unbekannt. The officers in the ready room laughed when the word Superfortress appeared on the translation sheet, some half-mythical American bomber rumored to carry a bomb load heavier than a Heinkel He-111 and a defensive suite that rendered it untouchable at altitude. They laughed because by April of 1945, laughter was the only weapon they had left. But the real was real, and when the projector whirred to life and the first ghostly images flickered onto the cracked wall, even the most cynical among them, veterans of Kursk, of Stalingrad, of the long attrition over the Reich, leaned forward in silence. The film showed a massive four-engine aircraft, silver-skinned and sleek, climbing higher than any known bomber, its pressurized cabin a sealed world above the weather. The intelligence officer narrating the footage spoke in clipped tones, explaining that it flew above 30,000 feet, carried remote-controlled turrets, and could strike targets over 3,000 miles away. Major Erich Neumann of Jägerschwader 300 spat out his cigarette and muttered, "Lügen. Amerikanisch propaganda." But when the officer advanced to the final reel, footage captured by the Japanese of Tokyo burning under waves of incendiary bombs, no one spoke. The sky itself seemed to burn on the wall, and the laughter drained from the room as the soundtrack hissed with the sound of wind and falling fire. Outside, in the distance, artillery rumbled like an oncoming storm. Sergeant Otto Keller, a ground crew chief who had not slept in 3 nights since his brother was killed in a Red Army advance west of Kustrin, broke protocol and slammed his fist against the projector. "Verdammt," he shouted, eyes wet. "We're fighting ghosts. Machines we cannot reach." The officer barked for silence, but the room stayed heavy with it. Keller was dragged outside, reprimanded, and sent back to the dispersal line to service a battered FW-190 that would never fly again. In the voiceover of history, this moment would become emblematic, not of defeat, but of realization. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of Europe's skies, was staring into the face of a technological epoch it could no longer comprehend. The B-29 Superfortress was not merely a bomber, it was a harbinger, a whisper of a post-war world built on altitude, distance, and annihilation from beyond reach. As the narrator's voice overlays the hum of the projector, it says, in April 1945, as Berlin burned, the German High Command finally understood the shape of the sky they would never own again. The scene shifts, cut to archival footage of exhausted pilots, their uniforms ash-streaked, faces hollow, standing beside the fuselage of a Messerschmitt 262. They joke in low tones, pretending not to notice the officer approaching with an American intelligence summary. The paper describes a new Boeing bomber, codenamed Model 345, with radar-guided bombing systems and a pressurized crew compartment. One pilot, Oberleutnant Hans Richter, reads it aloud, smirks, and says, "At that altitude, even God will freeze." But his smirk falters when he sees the attached reconnaissance photograph, an aircraft so large it dwarfs the escorting P-51s. In the film's narration, the voice deepens. For the German fighter corps, the sky had always been a duel, man against man, machine against machine. But now, a new order of warfare emerged, one where distance itself was the weapon. We cut to Keller again, sitting beside the ruined hangar, listening to the faraway drone of Soviet IL-2 strafing across the Oder. He wipes his hands on a rag blackened by oil and says to no one, "They said the B-29 carries fire." His superior, Lieutenant Worth, snaps back, "We have fire enough here." Yet in that line lies the cruel irony of history. The fires consuming Berlin would soon pale beside the fires of Tokyo, and later Hiroshima and Nagasaki. As the documentary score swells, strings rising beneath the low rumble of distant thunder, the narration continues. By the time the B-29's name reached the airfields of Germany, the war for Europe was already lost. Yet for those who lived by the sky, the revelation was personal, an unspoken admission that the age of the Luftwaffe was over. Archival maps appear on screen, overlaying the narrator's voice, showing range circles emanating from Saipan and Tinian, arcs that stretch across the Pacific like ripples of inevitability. The narrator explains how Luftwaffe intelligence officers, through the Abwehr liaison in occupied Denmark, intercepted American technical reports boasting of 100-foot wingspans and turbo-supercharged Wright R-3350 engines capable of driving the bomber past 350 miles per hour. Engineers at Dessau examined captured fragments and shook their heads. "This is not evolution," one remarked. "It is revolution." Even as they dismantled crashed B-17s for scrap, they realized the leap between those bombers and the B-29 was as vast as between a musket and a guided missile. But such realizations came too late. In the fading days of April, Keller once again broke protocol, this time not with anger, but with something like awe. He found a half-burned photograph pinned to the bulletin board of the operations hut, an aerial shot of Tokyo, white smoke rising like a spectral ocean. Beneath it, someone had scrawled in pencil, "Das ist Feuer vom Himmel." Fire from the sky. He tore it down, folded it into his breast pocket, and walked into the rain. The narrator's tone lowers, a slow cadence of elegy and inevitability. The German pilots had laughed once. They had laughed because laughter is the last defense against fear. But when fire rained from the sky, the laughter died, and the age of men with wings became the age of machines without mercy. But even as Keller walked into the rain, the sound of engines overhead dragged his gaze skyward, and for a fleeting second he thought he saw something beyond the low ceiling of smoke and ash, a silver glint, impossibly high, moving with the stillness of a star. Of course, it was nothing more than a reflection, a trick of light over a burning city, but to men who had lived their lives in the roar of pistons and the terror of pursuit, the idea of a machine that could cruise beyond sight, untouchable and silent, carried the weight of myth. In the control tower, the communications officer logged another lost frequency. The lines to the forward airfields had gone dead hours ago. The staff radio crackled with fragments, American B-17s over Dresden, British Typhoons strafing the Elbe crossings, but no one mentioned the new bomber by name. Still, the rumor spread like static, a fortress that flew above flak, a weapon that rained cities into dust. By midday, a Luftwaffe intelligence unit near Tangermund intercepted a coded Allied broadcast, and the interpreter noted a single phrase in his log, "silver plate." None of them understood what it meant, not then, but decades later historians would trace that word to the special B-29 program preparing atomic delivery systems. The narrator's voice shifts, measured and grave. In the spring of 1945, the German Air Service, blind and exhausted, glimpsed through rumor and reconnaissance a new architecture of destruction. They had built jet fighters, rocket interceptors, guided bombs, yet all their innovations lay in ruins before a machine conceived an ocean away. Cut to archival imagery of Messerschmitt engineers disassembling blueprints, of Me-262s abandoned on airstrips, snow gathering on their wings. One of them, a young draftsman named Kruger, writes in his notebook, Boeing B-29, possibly pressurized, perhaps invincible. If it exists, it will define the next century. He never sees one, but his words will survive. Meanwhile, Keller and the remnants of his maintenance crew are ordered to evacuate west toward the Harz Mountains, carrying only what fuel and munitions remain. He rides in the back of a truck, staring at the horizon where Berlin burns orange against the night sky. A comrade hands him a tin of coffee substitute and mutters, "They'll send these new bombers over us next, you'll see." Keller shakes his head. No, they don't need to. They already won. The narrator overlays, for the men of the Luftwaffe, defeat was not announced by surrender, it was measured in the silence of skies they no longer controlled. Cut to footage of American engineers walking along the runways of captured airfields, holding fragments of German jet prototypes. Their voices are calm, almost academic, as they examine the technology. The juxtaposition is cruelly poetic. While Germany's engineers dream of reaching higher, America's have already built the means to erase the very concept of contested airspace. As the narrator continues, the screen fills with images of Saipan, Tinian, Guam, airfields carved into coral and volcanic rock, home to the new armada of silver bombers. The camera pans slowly across rows of B-29s, their propellers gleaming, their names painted in bright letters, Enola Gay, Dauntless Dottie, Next Objective. Then the narrator returns us to Germany, where word of these bases filters through intelligence channels like smoke through cracks in stone. Oberleutnant Richter reads the report aloud by candlelight, operations from Pacific Islands, range sufficient to strike Japanese mainland. He chuckles softly. They build monsters for other wars. But even as he speaks, the rumble of distant artillery interrupts him, the front drawing closer each hour. The voiceover, they would not live to see it, but the German pilot's derision would echo across the coming decades, when newsreels showed what those monsters could do. The film cuts forward, Tokyo, August 1945. Flames consuming districts like kindling, civilians running through corridors of fire. Keller's photograph of Tokyo burning reappears, overlaid with new footage of a mushroom cloud rising into the stratosphere. The narrator lowers his tone until it is almost a whisper. When the fire truly came from the sky, the laughter of April 1945 was long forgotten. And in the gray stillness that followed, the world recalibrated itself around that single truth, that fire could fall from heaven not as divine punishment, but as engineering. In the damp concrete corridors of an Allied interrogation center near Augsburg, months later, the surviving German air officers sat under the dim glare of electric bulbs as American and British intelligence teams asked them about their jet fighters, their radar, their rockets. Yet time and again the conversation turned to that other machine, the one they had never fought. Major Newman, thinner now, his uniform stripped of insignia, leaned back in his chair and admitted quietly, "We thought it was propaganda. A machine too large, too perfect. We were building miracles with scrap metal and slave labor, they were building the future." The interrogator noted it without expression. The tape reels spun softly. Outside, rain pattered on the windows like static. Keller, now a prisoner assigned to clear debris from the airfield, paused in his work to watch an American transport glide in, a C-54, but for a moment he mistook it for the Superfortress itself. The same glint, the same calm grace. He whispered the phrase that had haunted him since the reel in Berlin, "Führer vom Himmel." The narrator overlays his whisper, repeating it in translation, "Fire from the sky." Then, quietly, for those who had lived and died by the speed of their own reflexes, the new war would belong to altitude, range, and silence. And by the time the interrogations ended and the months turned to years, the myth of the B-29 had already become a lesson written in every manual of post-war aviation. Keller would never fly again. He returned to a ruined Hamburg and took work repairing roofs, sometimes pausing when he heard the faint hum of airliners overhead, listening for the deep, steady beat that had once meant power beyond imagination. In his sleep he still saw the projector light flickering against the bunker wall, Tokyo burning like a second sun. The narrator's voice, low and measured, speaks over images of factories rising from rubble, of new aircraft rolling from American hangars, of test pilots climbing higher into the thin blue. In 1945 the sky ceased to be a battlefield of equals. It became a domain of distance and dominance, of engines that never saw the faces of those they destroyed. The film fades to footage of post-war memorials, rows of stone crosses under northern light, and the voice continues. They had laughed at the machine they could not imagine, and in that laughter lay the last echo of an old world. The screen fills with the slow-motion shot of a B-29 ascending through cloud, contrails spiraling behind it like pale scars. The music swells, not triumphant but elegiac, and the narrator delivers the closing line, almost a whisper over the steady rumble of the engines. From the ashes of a dying air force, the modern age of war was born. The men who once ruled the skies learned that the sky itself had changed, forever.